Hello. Welcome to the Hero Story Garden. My name is D. Smith, and I am joined by my lovely, amazing, and wonderfully gently rebellious co-host, Heidi Marke. Heidi, welcome. Thank you for being a part of our show once again. I'm so excited because today is the day that we explore the world of Tony Stark.
We do.
And I am wearing my Ironman gear. So this is officially the fourth show that I've had clothing that matches our show's theme. And I say four, even though this is episode 3. Don't let me confuse anybody here. Heidi and I filmed a debut teaser episode at the very, very beginning of this. What was that, in January or February?
One a month.
A while ago.
Yeah.
Where we did Man of Steel. That has been seen by a grand total of, I think, 12, maybe 15 people. That's a test drive to see if this thing would have legs, and it turns out that it did. And so when we officially began, we started with Spider-Man Homecoming. Our last episode was exploring what it means to be a hero with Captain America and Captain Marvel. And since in the first episode, when we looked at exploring the fear of speaking up and looking at Spider-Man Homecoming, we had to explore a little bit of the Tony Stark dynamic there because he was a mentor to Peter Parker. And Heidi was
a mentor, a terrible, terrible mentor.
Yes. Heidi was not a fan of that iteration of the way that Tony, that was her first rodeo with the Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark Iron Man personage. And so, but and she got some flack a little bit from our fellow hound, Mr. Mike Asherbranner. And so because of that, we've decided to make today's episode dedicated to Mr. Mike. So I don't think that he is live with us right now, but maybe he'll be.
He's in a meeting, yeah.
So, but we do have Jenlyn here, so thank you for tuning in and joining in already. We are going to be kicking things off here in just a moment. And what I really want to do to start everything off is I don't want to go in the. We're going to be looking at essentially the first 3 Iron Man movies. We're not going to be exploring the entire MCU depictions of Iron Man. And I will appreciate it just so you guys know, Heidi is still fresh into this universe. So where she is in the timeline of things, she has not seen Age of Ultron yet. So if you've watched any of the MCU films, you know she's about midway through. She's not anywhere close to the end. Please do not say anything in the comments. I'm not going to put those comments up anyways that would be spoilers for her, because I want her to have the experience of the fullness of not only the entirety of Tony Stark's timeline, but also the other Marvel characters as well. It's only fair for her to experience that from a pure standpoint. But since she's seen the first 3 Iron Man movies, and I think the first 2 Captain Americas, and I think the first 3 Thors.
Thor. Big fan of Thor.
And the first Avengers movie.
Yeah.
So she's got a more solid foundation of what it means to understand at least the beginning of an exploration of Tony Stark. But Tony Stark is a fantastic character that really, as Heidi and I have been talking about this dynamic, and it was her suggestion that we explore Tony Stark from a hero story garden perspective and shine a different kind of light on him because of something that when Heidi said it to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I struggled with this for a long time too. It's something she calls personal development hell. Now, I want you, Heidi, if you don't mind, to kind of give us an explanation of what personal development hell is for everybody, to kind of maybe check yourself and see if this is something you've struggled with as well.
Okay, so obviously I'm a transformational coach, so personal development, self-development, that's my thing, right? But what I notice in myself and in my clients is we tend to get stuck in self-development hell, which is when you're stuck in this cycle of thinking that there's something wrong with you that needs to be improved constantly. So life is one constant self-improvement project. Everything will happen when you've got better at. So you can, a really good practice actually to find out how you're doing with this is catch yourself every time you hear yourself saying, when I get better at this, then when I get better at this, then everything will magically fall into place, whatever it is, whether it's being physically fitter, mentally stronger, there's always something, right? And the problem with that is it means that you're never okay. You're never good enough for your own damn life, because you're always in this repetitive cycle of, I need to improve myself so that everything will come together. And that's self-development hell. It's a cyclical thing of, I need to be better, I need to be better, I need to be better, I need to be better. And that's no way to live. It's no fun at all. So the opposite to that is transformation through self-awareness, leading to greater self-knowledge and self-acceptance, self-forgiveness, and eventually self-love, but not in one go, in this spiral of revisiting things, and it gets deeper and deeper. And also how we do it matters. So self-development hell is that very, life is hard, I'm going to push on through, and everything I want's on the outside of my comfort zone, and everything's hard and nothing's fun. And self-development's really, really hard work. And it just becomes this huge a weight of an invisible secret get better at list stuck on your shoulder of unworthiness, as opposed to, we can make it fun and light. For example, we can get together and discuss Marvel movies and use them to gain insights into ourselves and gain greater awareness of how we work and how other people think. So we get more insights, and then we get more freedom to be ourselves by letting go of all the ways we think we need to constantly improve. Now, sometimes people hear this and think, but I want to be better. Yes, that's not the point. The point is that there's just different ways of doing it. We are all at our best when we love ourselves more, when we're less judgmental, more accepting. We're nicer to be around. We're less judgmental of each other. We're less grumpy. We're just better when we know our strengths and we love ourselves. So it's just a different way to get to, actually, I would argue it's a different way, but it also gets you to a much better place. So it's the gently rebellious way of doing personal transformation. It's fun.
And fun is such an important part of this whole dynamic. And that's one of my favorite things of being able to do this show with you, Heidi, and also one of my favorite things about just collaborating and having these kinds of conversations with you, because I'm a very deep thinker. I've always been a very deep thinker, but bringing deep thought and contemplation and understandings of different aspects of spirituality, personal growth, all that stuff, but then also bringing this fun dynamic in there makes the whole process so much more enjoyable.
Because you get that deep thinking where you get stuck in your head, but then if you shake yourself out of it, I think you've got to have both. It is the deepness and shallowness, keeping those two things together, bringing them together. Yeah.
Kind of a yin and yang sort of thing.
Maybe.
So let's dig into the story of Tony Stark. I want to say right off the bat that this is something I was really paying attention to over the past 2.5 days. I've rewatched all 3 Ironman movies because I wanted to be very fresh on this discussion. And from a storytelling standpoint, there's something I noticed about the way that the whole thing was really set up. And Iron Man was the first of the big 3, as they call it in the MCU: Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. The company of Marvel itself test drove to see if those 3 characters would reside and resonate with audiences, then they would pursue the idea of doing a super team movie, i.e. the Avengers. But Iron Man was the trial before Captain America, before Thor. And most of the movie-going public had no idea who Iron Man was. They knew who Captain America was because Captain America had been a big part of our heritage in America for the longest time. And Thor is sort of, but that there's some Norse mythology that's attached to that, so that's a little bit still more well-known. But from a movie-going standpoint, an audience standpoint, an entertainment standpoint, nobody knew who Tony Stark was outside of the comic book super nerds. So how did Marvel address that? How did they address that in the film? Most of the time, watch any superhero movie or any mythical character movie, and these you have this long backstory, this narration that goes for a very long time to establish who the hero is. But in the first 10 minutes, maybe even sooner than that, we know exactly who Tony Stark is. We know exactly the kind of character that he is being portrayed as. And we know at the very beginning, we're inserted into this moment of transformation for him, because he goes from making a weapons demonstration where he's a rock star in front of all of the US military, showing off his weapons of mass destruction and how his dad is this Howard Hughes like genius, and he's the prodigal son, so to speak, running this entire corporation. They did all this little backstory stuff and kind of this little snippet, like a Entertainment Tonight sort of piece, which was really well done. And then he's on this convoy that gets hijacked, and he gets taken prisoner, and he's held underground in these caves by a bunch of terrorists. And he's at this existential place in his life where he starts to question everything and wondering, what is going on and how am I going to get out of this? Now, most films would take about, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour and a half to get us up to that point. They didn't do that in this movie. They inserted us in right at the beginning of his crux point for where he would make his first change in going from being a billionaire, playboy, philanthropist that didn't really give a crap about anything because he didn't know who he was, into deciding his life has to be worth more than that. And so as we begin this conversation, Heidi, I want to start talking about this closer look at this profound transformation that Tony goes through from being a self-absorbed billionaire playboy to suddenly having this massive amount of self-awareness and taking personal responsibility for these weapons that his whole company and essentially his family have been producing for the duration of his life. So share some insights that you have, a gently rebellious perspective on this transformation that Tony goes through at the very beginning of the film.
Yeah, I've just realised you're right. We do go straight into his Dark Night of the Soul. There's no character build-up at all, really, is there? There's just a statement. He is this really despicable kind of character. There's no reason particularly to like him. I mean, he's Robert Downey Jr., so he's likable. I think if somebody else had played him, he might not be as likable. So I think it was a good pick. But yeah, suddenly he goes from completely naive weapons manufacturer to a terrifying experience. And it's a very long experience, isn't it? It's a very much a long, dark night of the soul, stuck, trapped. And also he's physically threatened. So it's not just that he's trapped and he can't get out. So he doesn't have any of his normal playboy resources, you know, calling a helicopter to come and rescue him. He's completely lost. But also physically he's affected because his heart has got damaged. So there's a lot going on for him. He's threatened on every level, but also he realizes that the weapons that he's been selling were the weapons that have just been, the weapons are being sold to the wrong people. So there's absolutely every single aspect of his life is threatened at once, which is quite unusual. Usually you could kind of draw it out. There'd be chapters. No, we're straight in with every terrible possible thing could happen to him happens at once. And it is actually a really genuinely frightening situation. You know, even though you think, well, he's a baddie. He's not, because we like him, partly because he's Robert Downey Jr. So, you know, there's some sympathy there. But you don't want him. You don't want him. You do have sympathy for him, which is quite interesting because he's a weapons manufacturer and he's an egotistical playboy. But you do genuinely have sympathy for him and you want him to survive. And what I really like is that he has to build Ironman, the suit, to escape. And so in that first film, you kind of think that, well, my first experience of the film was that's his Superman thing. That's his Spider-Man thing. You know, that's how he gets his superpowers. And I was kind of disappointed because he doesn't really have any superpowers. It's not him. You know, he's got a suit on, right? So he's kind of cheating. In my kind of book, it was like a lower level of superhero because he doesn't have actual, like Spider-Man has actual Spidey things going on. And Superman has great Superman You know, Superman can whiz around the whole planet, right?
But by
So there's
that,
like,
but by that same token, you have to say the same thing about Batman. He doesn't have any supernatural powers, but it's his mind, his focus, and his sheer will and determination to fight against injustice at all costs. And so he uses his ingenuity, he uses his wealth. I mean, in so many ways, Iron Man is
yeah,
the Marvel version of Batman in a lot of ways.
okay, but not as cute, because we like Batman because the 70s version was very lightweight and funny, and my generation grew up with him, so it's different. Whereas Iron Man is a man who appeared to lack self-awareness and moral courage, who builds a suit to escape for himself. So my first kind of thing, and bear in mind, I was already down on Tony Stark with the whole, he was a really bad mentor to Spider-Man. So this is my experience. So the first film for me is, in my head, I'm going, okay, so this is his Dark Night of the Soul. This is when he becomes Iron Man. In the same way that every superhero has to have their moment where they find their inner strength to escape a bad situation. But as you know, as we go through the 3 films, man, he's so much more than that. So much more than that. So yeah, the first one's really cool because he becomes Iron Man. So he's invented this, and it is genius. I mean, let's face it, actually looking back, even in the first film, I can see he's an absolute engineering genius, and you've got to respect that. But didn't really hit me till the 3rd film, how amazing he is. That is a real superpower. But one thing I really like about him in this film is his moral courage. So he does not want to leave the other prisoner, the doctor who saves his life. He doesn't want to lose him. His plan was always to take him out with him. I really like that about him. And I also really like the way that he comes back out of that horrible, horrible experience, not just as this potential superhero, but also with absolute moral courage and integrity. And that was really cool. I really liked that part of it. Yeah. Until obviously, can I mention the end of the film? Do we ruin films for people? No, we don't. Everybody who watches this says they like that they don't have to watch it. So the bit at the end where you think he's going to keep it secret and he just says, I am Iron Man at the press conference. Mm-hmm. That, of course, is when he starts to lose. You know, he goes back downhill again. So what I like about the whole Iron Man films is in normal self-development, there's a lot. If you think about personal transformation and the whole kind of very dramatic walking through fire type insight and transformation, they're a once and done deal, aren't they? And what I really like about this is what Iron Man shows us is how untrue that is. How actually for all of us, self-development isn't a one really hard, painful push. It's a spiral of gradual. And what he does is we're starting to like him, and then we're like, oh, but now he's just egotistical again. Because at the end of the film, he's just, look at me, I'm amazing. And he's just back to almost where he was at the beginning in terms of being that playboy egotistical thing again. It's just that he's had a transformation because he knows that the weapons weren't going to the right place. So he's got some moral courage. He's built a suit. You know, that's like, hooray, we have Iron Man. And then the very last bit of the film, he blows it. And he goes back into playboy egotistical.
I think that this is actually an interesting juxtaposition to draw here, because is he going into ego slash being the self-absorbed billionaire when he admits that he's Iron Man, or is this another iteration and another way that he's taking personal responsibility for himself? Because it could be since and I think this is an important thing to say, because when he comes back from the desert after he's made his initial suit and he's freed himself, but he saw the atrocities of what was being done with his own stuff, and so he sees his missiles, his weapons all over the place in these bunkers of terrorists, and he's being held at gunpoint and basically threatened to death. You're going to build this weapon for me or I'm going to kill you. And then after you build it, you can be set free. And he realizes, no, I'm going to die either way. So if I'm going to die, I might as well die trying to liberate myself and my friend here. and take back what's mine and keep it out of the hands of these people. And he comes back to America with this completely different perspective on the work that it is that he does. And he decides to ixnay the weapons development platform of their business, which is roughly 75% of this multi-billion-dollar corporation, to the extent where Obadiah Stane, his father's business partner, his mentor, and I think that actually now that I'm saying it out loud, I think this is an important point to make.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
Perhaps Tony is terrible at being a mentor because he had such terrible mentorship. And because he hasn't had a model for what that looks like for him to be able to live that out. And he is doing so many trial runs trying to recorrect the mistakes he feels was made to him by the people in front of him, that he doesn't necessarily have a grid for what that actually looks like. I realized
because it's a terrible betrayal. I mean, that betrayal was really bad. Like really, really, really bad. Because he's already lost his father. So his father's best friend and his business partner is his next best thing. And he has him try to be killed. You know, that's a betrayal. Yeah. I can see you're just going to keep arguing for Tony Stark.
Here's what I'm doing. I'm presenting both sides of the coin. Okay, so I can totally understand the other side of, like, looking at this from an empathy standpoint. Melissa's here, and Melissa is the queen of empathy. But looking at this from an empathy standpoint, it's easy for us, I think, as big-hearted, especially those of us who are empathic and are highly sensitive and are heart-centered people. It's easy for us to, if we're looking at the dynamic between Spider-Man / Peter Parker and Iron Man / Tony Stark, to instantly feel empathy, immense empathy for Peter Parker. We can relate to him, the all-around good guy that just wants to do good by people and not try to, take credit for things. And then it's also, with that perspective, an opportunity for us to extend compassion and empathy for the opposite of that, which is Tony Stark, and looking at it from his perspective. But what I want to say about him taking credit for "I am Iron Man" at the end of the first movie has a ripple of implications that stretches all throughout the remainder of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as you will find the more you watch these movies.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm proposing here is, since he came back from his harrowing escape from captivity, taking responsibility for what was done with his name, if he doesn't take responsibility for building the suit and wearing the suit and him going into these war zone areas without the authorization of the United States government, in a lot of ways, Iron Man 2 does not work. Iron Man 3 absolutely does not work. The Iron Patriot, aka War Machine, does not work. He doesn't become a member of the Avengers, because how could Tony Stark just be a member of the Avengers unless he is equipping all of the other Avengers with super suits? It doesn't work. He has to take responsibility.
That's a good point. And also, what I'd like to say is that what's really interesting for me and what works so well in this discussion is that you know so much and I know so little. And what I find absolutely fascinating is that because you know much more, you can be more compassionate. And for me, what I found watching the 3 Iron Man movies, after really not liking my first introduction to Tony Stark with in Spider-Man, is that the more that I get to know this character, the more I like him. And by the end of the 3 films, I love him. Like, now I'd be defending him. Like, Mike would be so pleased to have a discussion with me now, because by the end of it, I was like, I absolutely love him. And in Iron Man 3, I was very much more emotionally connected and very much like cheering it, like really, really in with it. And I think for me, there's a real lesson there in self-knowledge and other knowledge. Like, when we get to know ourselves, we can be more understanding, compassionate with ourselves. But when we reserve judgment on other people, which is easier to do when we know ourselves and love ourselves, because I firmly believe that when we're being judgy of other people, it's because we feel threatened and we're being judgmental and harsh on ourselves. And that self-knowledge and that other knowledge represented in in this case with, I don't know that much about Marvel movies, you know such an impressive amount. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's just amazing. You have a very different perspective, and that is a real, I don't know, for me, just going through that evolution of getting to know this one character, and I know I'm not anywhere near his story yet, and how much more understanding and compassionate I feel towards him by Iron Man 2 and then Iron Man 3 compared to the beginning. There's just a real lesson there, isn't there? Get to know yourself, get to understand yourself, get to know other people, listen to other people, reserve judgment. It's just it's so powerful.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. But here's the thing though, like, because we have different perspectives and different like pedigrees of history with these characters and with these films, that actually I think makes this conversation even more dynamic, because in a lot of ways I need to have that fresh, like, kind of brand new to the whole territory ideology and perspective to be able to, like, it's something that John Spiesman talks about a whole lot. He's a fellow hound of ours, and one of the things that he does is he helps leaders zoom out and take a look at the big picture to see all the details. And I think you helped me do that with this, Heidi, because you're coming at it from this completely different angle. With all of the times that I've seen these movies and how like nerdy I can get about this stuff, I can zoom into all these specific details and go, well, because of this, this leads to this, and this leads to this, and this leads to this. But sometimes we need to be able to zoom back out. And I think when we're looking at this from the place of what our theme is for today, personal development hell, this is something that is really important for us to take into account of. And this is why working with people like you as the Gentle Rebellion coach is such a valuable perspective for us to have as we are going through our own personal growth and personal discovery. Same reason why working with somebody like me and helping to take a look at the big overarching story that you're telling for yourself and what your self-concept is versus these little details about why you feel like your life isn't working out is really an important part of this whole process.
Yeah.
So my pause was there for you to add more to that.
No, I'm just like, no, hell yes. Like, it worked. I've learned so much from having these conversations with you, and I always find it amazing how much work, because I love putting watch Marvel movies on my work list and then sending, then you ask me for my initial insights and then you ask me for my later insights, and then that discussion we get into. I have learned so much from being part of this with you. It's just incredibly rich, which is hilarious, isn't it? Because before I would have gone, yeah, they're superhero movies. And now I'm just, I wonder what this story's going to tell me. And look, I know that because, and there's Thor's hammer has appeared. I'm really getting into all of the, and I really so I'm the kind of person, I'm sure I've told you this, who, when we get to the end of a film, you know how some films at the end have a little bit that goes into the future?
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. And I actually get quite upset when there isn't a little and in the future, this, like the other day we watched The Sound of Music, hadn't watched it for years. And I'm like, I wonder what happens next. And my partner just said, well, they go to Switzerland, live happily ever after. I'm like, no, but I'd really like to see, did they have more children? Did the children sing? But with the Marvel thing, I didn't. But first of all, I felt incredibly overwhelmed. Like, when you talk about all of these different films, I'm like, man. Whereas now I'm like, so we get to find out what happened to that character, and then it develops, and it's brilliant the way it all. Yeah, I'm really, really enjoying that constant deeper understanding. It's just such a rich thing to do. So yeah,
woohoo! Well, yes. So I think Marvel didn't necessarily introduce the idea of the teaser trailer at the end of the movie, but they certainly have turned it into where it's an expectation now. You go see a Marvel anything, and at the end of the credits, actually before the credits officially begin to roll, you get the initial teaser preview, and then the whole. And I think it's genius in a way.
Yeah.
To make us sit through the credits, because all of those people made the movie happen. They're officially getting credit, but we are walking away from the screen or turning it off and
not me. I'm the person who sits in the I always sit till the end.
Exception to
Just
the
in
rule.
case. Just in case. And also because I'm like, man, all of those people had a job. And I'm always amazed at how many people do. And I also always want to, anyway, we're going off target because anyway, let's stay with Tony Stark because his character development and what I learned from him.
So it's a very interesting thing. If we're let's treat this as though, because we've talked about, the end of Iron Man 1. Tony takes credit for. He's got it's interesting. We see this now. I think we've always recognized that anytime there's some sort of event that happens, whether it's a political figure or some sort of catastrophe that's taken place or whatever, the person that's in front of the camera, it has this statement that they have that has been prepared by an attorney. Is this what actually happened? 99% of the time, no, it is not. But that is what they are told to say by the people that are running the show. And Tony has been ordered essentially by S.H.I.E.L.D. Just stick to the card. This government agency that's supposed to be running the whole thing anyways, just stick to the card. Here's your statement. Here's what happened. We created this whole because that's what Agent Coulson says. We've created this whole fictitious story. We've corroborated it with all of these agencies so that you were on this yacht with this group of people. And we've all got 25 sworn testimonies of these people swearing that this is where you were. It's all a big lie. It's all a big fabrication. And Tony, a guy that has lived a lot of fabricated stories, decides, you know what? I am Iron Man. And that's how it ends. So when we begin Iron Man 2, again, a very interesting thing that they did this in a subtle way. I'm just going to bring this up because we brought it up in the first part. They could have spent a long time making it look like everything was hunky-dory in Tony Stark's life. And then he has some sort of, sudden bout of moral consciousness. And then he has to face some sort of moral dilemma. Or there's this bad guy that kind of starts to show up, but we've got to give his long backstory. They didn't do that again. Vanko is the son of Howard Stark's, Tony's dad's former scientific partner who helped invent the atomic bomb and then went crazy. And his son, the dynamic between the Vankos and the Starks is almost identical. They're almost living parallel lives, except that the Starks are billionaires and have had all kinds of government contract stuff, and the Vankos have been living almost in exile. But they're both scientific geniuses, and they both create essentially the same things. The little I forget what it's called. The thing that's inside Tony's chest that keeps him alive, but also is a weapon for him. Vanko does
it's a heart reactor, but I think it's an arc reactor.
The arc reactor. That's it. Look at you!
Yay me!
Look at you, winner.
Oh, Marvel geek, brilliant.
So we begin the second movie with this again place where Tony has to get to, where he has to choose what is the next road for him. He's realizing that the arc reactor in his chest is not going to work because his blood and he's is it Paladin or something like that? He's got a blood toxicity level that continues to increase. And no matter what he tries to do to fix it, nothing's working. And then on top of that, this long lost person from his past that he has never heard of. He doesn't know that somebody else has the brilliant genius that he does, but there's somebody else that has his genius and his technology that shows up and essentially declares war on him to his face. And so he's immediately thrust back into this war. Oh, and on top of that, going back to responsibility, the U.S. government wants to commandeer his Iron Man suit and claim that it is a weapon of mass destruction and that he has to hand it over to them. So he's really facing three enemies at the same time. And this is just to begin the film. So I think this is
I got lost at the beginning. I was like, everybody's bad, who's good? Oh no, he's bad as well. And I thought he was good. And so that's well played. Well, for somebody like me who's like innocently falls into these films expecting some people to be nice. But yeah, it was like, and he's bad as well. Like, man, how many people have to, it was harsh. I thought it was harsh. It was a harsh start, I thought.
Well, So when he's sitting in the chamber of Congress, and Larry Sanders, the comedian, is playing this, senator and accusing him of all these things and trying to make him look really terrible. And then they bring out this other guy who's basically a poor man's version of Tony. He doesn't have the tech. He doesn't have the genius. He's an imitation of Tony Stark in every way, shape, and form, and clearly trying to imitate him. And doesn't he? Not only is he an imitation, he doesn't have the charisma. I'm talking about Justin Hammer. He doesn't have the charisma. He doesn't have the confidence. He doesn't have the fortitude to be able to go toe to toe in an intellectual conversation, let alone a technological conversation, let alone any other kind of conversation. He's a fraud. And we see that very clearly. But somehow this fraud has convinced the American government agencies that they need to be buying into his stuff and they need to be putting Tony Stark on trial. But we see Tony, even though his health is not doing very well, and even though there's other aspects of his life that are falling apart, he still manages to hold his own very well against this imposter.
He really went up in my estimation again then. And actually, one of the things that I discovered for myself is that because he isn't in self-development hell, he has a strength that really emphasized for me the importance of staying out of self-development hell for ourselves and backing ourselves. So because he is very egotistical and very self-reliant, so he's very like, I'm me, I'm doing it my way, and just like he's and you could argue, is he a good team player? There's all sorts of things you could go into, but the thing that I love about him is one of his strengths is his insensitivity. One of his strengths is the fact that he knows who he is. He knows that he's a narcissistic, egotistical playboy. He states that with beautiful self-knowledge and self-awareness. And because he knows who he is, but because he also has incredible moral courage, even though he can be he can be very disagreeable, but he has this strength where he just just insults everything. There's no people pleasing. Everything just water off a duck's back. And there's a real strength for me in that. So for me, his insensitivity is a strength because it gives him incredible resilience. He doesn't need to be liked. He's not trying to constantly improve himself. He's not trying to be better at connecting with people. He's not trying to be nicer. He's not trying to make anybody happy. And that's not because he doesn't care about people. The people he cares about, he is incredibly loyal to. So this for me is when he starts to transform into somebody I can like more, because he's literally saying no. And yeah, he's very cocky, isn't he, in the kind of government situation, but that's funny and likable in itself because it's rebellious. So we like that. But there is that thing about him that really shines for me. So my biggest personal insight and growth for myself and ability to continue practicing the gently rebellious way of personal transformation, the letting go of the idea that there's anything wrong with us, was to take that see that clearly as a strength. And I honestly, and Mike needs to watch this bit when he's out of his meeting, I honestly will eternally be grateful to Tony Stark for teaching me that, because that there's a strength in knowing who you are, having that awareness, and not beating yourself up and trying to bend yourself into all sorts of shapes so you keep everyone around you happy. And that's so clear. So, and I find that's hilarious for me to say that his insensitivity is a gift. I never thought I'd think that. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And Sierra, you're exactly right. He does have a very be first approach to the way that he does everything, which is, and I love the way that you said that, like in his quote unquote egotism, in his narcissism, there is not an ounce, not a shred, not a sliver of people pleasing. Like that's not something that has any place in his consciousness whatsoever. He's entirely so self-focused on what is it that is in my best interest. And for those of us that are, very big-hearted, very empathetic, very empathic, highly sensitive people that have probably fallen prey to or been, people that have practiced consciously and unconsciously people-pleasing patterns, and maybe been judgmental against other people who seem to be quote unquote narcissists, something to appreciate about them, and maybe even take a page out of their playbook. How can I be more me first in a way that's actually healthy and isn't so driven by either what other people think about me, or having to prove something to other people, or having something that where I'm trying to do something to get other people to like me? How can I be out of that whole energy space, be in
Yeah,
my
and
own
that
energy
constantly
space?
needing to improve to be worthy of taking up space on the planet, to be worthy of your own life. Like he just has this natural sense of there's nothing wrong with me, and that there is something good about that. And it's not that he's not a shallow character. It wouldn't work if he was a shallow character. He actually gets to be a deeper and deeper character. I'm now becoming one of his biggest fans, which is hilarious. But yeah, that was a real deep turning point for myself there in how I looked at that behavior. Because he has enough other redeeming, because he uses it for good, actually. You would want him on your side. He is the most loyal friend. He's just, and he does have a strong moral compass. So it's just a different way of moving through the world, isn't it? With this insensitivity, and that's good because we're all different. But he backs himself. He doesn't go through constant self-doubt. There are times when he has self-doubt. You can see different things, particularly later with his development of his relationship with Pepper. You can see all sorts of things going on there, and obviously his relationship with his dead father and things he discovers and picks up there, which does affect his, and I will forgive him eventually, his ability to mentor Peter Parker. But yeah, we have to learn to back ourselves. We have to learn to challenge that self-doubt. We have to learn to know ourselves, and he's just rocking it.
Well, I'm going to throw a shout out to my good buddy Steve Palferman because of what you just shared. He's going to watch this on the replay because he lives in Australia, and it's like 2:00 in the morning right now for him. But we had a conversation on Sunday, and Steve was he was the first coach that I ever hired and worked with, and has been a humongous part of my transformation, personal transformation and business transformation journey. But he said something to me in 2015 that has stuck with me and lasted this stretch of time. And it's exactly what you just said, Heidi. He said, the more you back yourself, the faster you will get there. And so Tony Stark being an embodiment of that piece of wisdom is such a beautiful thing for us to really accent. And I want to bring up one other thing while we're on the subject of Ironman 2 before we switch into Ironman 3 and wrap up our show for today. But there's another side of this whole coin. Actually, there's 2 points I want to make here. It's interesting that what you were saying a minute ago about the loyalty that comes from backing yourself. So for a long time, the playboy womanizer side of Tony Stark has no loyalty to a romantic interest of any kind. But it's interesting that he attracts the most loyal person to be his partner in Pepper Potts. Also interesting that somebody that, in a way, his loyalty, yes, is to himself, but it's also to this idea that he has for what is, this kind of goes back to our conversation last time when we were talking about moral compass and choosing right for the sake of right. Tony is trying to the best of his ability to do the right thing by his own standards. Now, his standards seem to change, and his self-concept seems to change in a couple different ways, but he's trying to find that true north. And it's interesting that his best friend is somebody that is Colonel Rhodes. And in the second film, their friendship gets challenged in innumerable ways because of political differences between the two of them, ideological differences between the two of them, and also Tony's bout with alcoholism. And in the comic books, they do a really good job of exploring Tony's alcoholism and what this looks like. And all of us were kind of curious. I say all of us Marvel nerds were curious how they were going to portray that on film. Would they even address that? Would that be something that Disney would be willing to address outright. And they did, thankfully. But we see the ramifications of what alcoholism brings into Tony's life and how it not only hurts his health in a variety of ways, ruins a lot of relationships, but it creates, for a while, it creates this separation between him and his best friend. And then there is this long period of reconciliation that takes place. And it's not just reconciliation between the two of them, but it's also a reconciliation that Tony has within himself. And like you said a minute ago, he is regularly willing to just upfront own the places where he has dropped the ball. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't have excuses. He's not trying to hide behind some other justification for things. He's like, no, that's me. That's what I do. And I think this goes back to the point that you were saying a minute ago, not only about the backing yourself part, but about the I don't have anything to prove to anybody else.
Yeah. So in my Gently Rebellious coaching world, that would be when we are able to. So the reason it's gentle rebellion and not feisty is the gentleness is just being able to say, this is who I am. This is who I am. These are my non-negotiables. These are my values. And being able to say, and that's not for me. And that's what he's doing. It's just this is who I am. And there's no justification. There's no constantly trying to explain why and negotiate. He's just, this is where you are. And I really, yeah. So even though he's quite feisty, he's actually gently rebelling because he just is.
Well, it's in that gentle rebellion that he's able to team up once again with his best friend, Colonel Rhodes, who becomes the character we know as War Machine, at least in the second film, who has this super souped up Ironman suit that's basically just that. It's a machine made for war with every kind of freaking machine gun you can imagine on it. And it's interesting because when we see Justin Hammer's tech, his robots, his drones, or whatever they're called, that show up in the kill box inside this thing to destroy Tony and Colonel Rhodes, they easily dismantle their little drone bot machines that are supposed to be the replacements for Iron Man in a matter of moments. And then when Vanko, aka what's his? I've had a brain fart. Kevin, help me.
What the guy with the
Whiplash. Sorry, yes, Whiplash. Yeah. That's his villain name. When he shows up and he's got his suit and he's doing all this stuff, it was interesting. This is another place where I think, from a storytelling standpoint, they could have made the final fight scene a whole lot longer. And it could have gone like back and forth, been more like a Rocky IV sort of thing, but they didn't. Whiplash, Vanko, gets his shots in pretty well. He seems to have everything handled really well, but it's not until Tony and Rhodes have a reunion mention where the fight that they'd had earlier in the film, where they'd gone back and forth in their suits and they both shot rays out of their hands at each other and it basically destroyed the whole space, where they realized, oh wait, this is a weapon we can use together. And when they realize that that's actually them together is the secret to beating the villain, that's when the battle's over. And I thought that was a beautiful way of capstoning that whole idea, and for them to end the film in that way.
Yeah.
All right. With that, let's move on to taking a look at the third movie. So, Iron Man 3 is a different kind of film, and I was recalling how right before this movie came out, the guy that made this movie was Jon Favreau, who plays Happy, the bodyguard, was the director for the first two films. They had a different guy, I think his name is Shane Black, who directed the third film. Screenplay, I think, was written by Favreau or whatever, but they wanted to kind of make this movie a little bit different and feel a little bit different, and it did in a lot of ways. But they really wanted, and this is something that Heidi was bringing up to me in our conversations leading up to our show today, they really wanted this to be something where Tony had to go within himself and decide, is it the suit that makes the man, or is it the man that makes the suit? Who is he outside of having this suit of armor? Is this suit of armor what makes him the superhero, or is it something else? And so, if you haven't seen the movie, here's a little bit of insight into it. Tony he decides to face off in a sort of publicity stunt kind of thing against this dictator terrorist who has been blowing up places all over the world and claiming responsibility for it, who is called the Mandarin. And at the same time,
or Mike from Neighbours.
yes, and at the same time, he is subtly being confronted by memories of the past of rejecting somebody that had some technology that he didn't want to mess around with because he thought it was inferior to his own. And so he let this guy, played by, I think his name is Killian, he's played by Guy Pearce, leaves him stranded on the top of the roof on New Year's Eve in 1999 and totally rejects him. He returns about 14 years later, now running this very successful government think tank and looking completely different. He has a whole new presence to him. And while all this is happening, so many areas of Tony Stark's life are falling apart again. This kind of, now that we're exploring this seems to be a prevalent theme that runs through all of the Iron Man movies. He's got areas of his personal life, areas of his business, and areas of the way that he is seen in terms of the public perception that are all falling apart, and in some ways his health as well.
But that's really helpful, isn't it, for this conversation? Because it is that personal development is a spiral, not a once and done thing. You know, you're not either like rubbish and then you're suddenly brilliant. That's not personal development. It's this, you know, it's the difference, I guess, with films where there's a person that's struggling and now everything's okay, which is similar to you go on a retreat and you have a big insight and then you feel great. But then, of course, when you go back home, you have to, you know, you've still got your integration and everything. So what I really, really like about these films, and I wasn't actually happy with the beginning of Ironman 3 because by now I'm starting to really like this character, and he's so unhappy and he's going through a really, really terrible time. So I wasn't really happy they'd done that. But actually, for the purpose of personal development, it's perfect because it does show, well, first of all, it grows enormous depth in his character, but also it shows like it is this. I like to start my work with the Zen premise that you're both perfect and a work in progress, and the work in progress is the letting go of all the ways you think there's something wrong with you, rather than treating yourself as something to fix all the time. And what it shows with him is he does have this solid resilience of you know, I'm me and I'm strong, but he also does have his life falling to pieces in different ways, or often lots of bits all at once. And, you know, and it's beautiful because it does allow us to see his character development and how somebody who does back himself sees himself through difficult times. And I think it's brilliant for this conversation. Like, they could have made it better for us.
Well, something else that the movie and the whole Marvel MCU series does a really good job of that other superhero movies don't, especially in the idea of series whatnot, is so about midway through Iron Man 3, so Tony has experienced a terrorist attack against himself at his home. When these helicopters show up, they're firing missiles into his home, and he's thankfully had the technology to be able to create a suit that will attach itself onto him without him having to go into that whole build machine thing. But it saves his life, but also the escape plan out of almost being buried underwater puts him on this trajectory to find this person that he's been looking for, to kind of do some investigation for what's caused these explosions to happen all over the place. Well, it puts him in the middle of Tennessee in the wintertime, and he doesn't know where he is. He doesn't really have any money. He doesn't have an identity, and his suit basically is completely out of gas. And so Tony has to use his own ingenuity. He has to use his own sense of resources, and he has to use his charisma in some ways to talk to a kid in particular that he kind of commandeers his garage. But actually, when I was watching this movie last night or the night before that, I was thinking, this is actually a pretty good, and I was curious what you thought about this, Heidi. This was actually a pretty good perspective early on to see why he was such, in a way, a not so suitable mentor early on for Peter Parker, because how does he treat that kid? He comes into the kid's garage, takes over his stuff, compliments him for his potato gun, but basically says, okay, well, I'm going to set up shop here. I need you to get me this, and go get me a sandwich too. Does the kid know who he is? Yeah, maybe he's Tony Stark, but like none of that stuff was Tony's. But he walks in there like he owns the place and starts telling the kid that actually lives there what to do for him as though he's an employee, which is a very interesting sort of dynamic. And then, but one of the things that happens, and this is what I was kind of alluding to a second ago, Marvel did really well addressing the impact, the psychological impact that trauma has on the characters. Because Tony, I mean, all of the, big three and everybody on the Avengers experienced trauma when they were fighting aliens in the middle of New York City. However, Tony is the one guy that has a atomic missile that he shoots up into this black hole in the middle of the space and throws it into this spaceship and manages to somehow slip back into reality right before the wormhole closes up and everything fries. Now, that's like from a moviegoer standpoint, we as an audience are used to watching these kinds of crazy experiences take place on film in an entertainment presentation standpoint. We don't think anything of it because that's not our life. But the way that they told this story of, no, if Tony actually experienced this, it isn't something that he just shakes off and wakes up the next day and goes, oh, okay, time for me to be Iron Man again. No, he can't get that out of his head. He has PTSD from it. It's like a soldier coming back from war. He can't get it out of his mind. He's scarred by it. And so when he starts having these like moments, it's not that he's just being a jerk, because the little kid is being a little kid. The little kid starts asking him a whole bunch of questions and doesn't stop asking him questions and has no awareness whatsoever that the more he asks these questions, the harder it is and the more he's triggering Tony. But it makes sense now in seeing the way that dynamic, that relationship goes, that there's some things that Tony hasn't come to terms with from the New York experience of Avengers 1, and also just the way that he is as a human being and the way that he ran Stark Enterprises. Because we see that over and over again. This is another juxtaposition. We see that over and over again from the first Iron Man movie and the second Iron Man movie when Pepper Potts becomes CEO. And she's doing all that she can to keep the company together. And Tony acts like it doesn't, like, why are you making such a big deal about this? And she's like, you have no idea how hard it is to hold all this stuff together, to protect your public image, to protect the public image of the company. So it's clear that Tony's not a very good CEO either. His leadership actually is probably put into question quite a bit, but we don't see that unless we do some of these deep dive explorations.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, yeah, I mean, he's not made to be CEO. He's too in on himself, isn't he? He's only really focused on himself. But having said that what I found really, really interesting about the beginning of this film is you just think, well, he's got PTSD, he's having a terrible time, which I didn't like to see. It's not nice, but it's a good thing to see. Like you say, we get to see the effects of it, because actually when he flies up to save the battle, when he flies up in that Avengers movie or whatever, was it an Avengers movie? What is it I watched?
Yeah, Avengers.
That bit, yeah. He actually thinks he's going to die. You know, he doesn't go up there expecting to come out again. So it is a big deal. But what's actually, so in the beginning of the film, he's a complete mess and he's not really talking to Pepper, and then he admits that he's struggling. That's quite it's a very painful thing to watch. And then he does another very self-destructive thing when he's not really fit enough to, by drawing the baddie into his actual home, which puts Pepper and everybody at risk. But interestingly, when he's now in the next emergency, which is he's basically incredibly vulnerable, he's landed a long way from home, he doesn't have access to any of his workshop, which is his real superpower. And yeah, you could say, well, how is he treating the kid? But I think it works out really well for that kid, because that kid doesn't have a great life, actually. He has a really sad life and he's being bullied. And this superhero walks in, who he does respect, and just tells him to do this, 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 and this. And in some way, that's really good, because now this kid has huge and very, very exciting responsibility to help save the world. So actually, even though you could say, well, that's not a very good way to treat the child, it's not terrible. He doesn't do anything terrible to him. And also, he does at the end some absolutely brilliant things for this child. So it actually has a really good impact on him. And I think, yeah, I really like the way that the child gets an opportunity to have responsibility and grow up a bit. I think there's something good about that for him, actually.
Well, I agree with you. And there's again, I think this is I don't necessarily know that they were going to bring Spider-Man into this universe the way that they ended up doing, because obviously this movie was made like, I don't know, 7 years or 8 years before that came out. But it is an interesting sort of preview of what Tony as a mentor, Tony as somebody that is working with somebody else, especially a kid of any kind, like what that relationship dynamic might look like. So I think that's a very interesting perspective. Now I want to bring up one other thing here, and I'm curious what your perspective is on this, Heidi. At the very beginning of Iron Man 3, Killian, I don't remember his last name. It's Guy Pearce's character. He's this awkward guy with long hair and kind of gangly teeth, and he's got some medical issues, but he's a nerdy guy that is he's not a ladies' man at all, but he's kind of trying to get the attention of the girl that Tony Stark was with at the time, who was a botanist and did a bunch of other things. And like I said earlier, Tony finds a way to kind of manipulate him and get him to go up on the roof, telling him he'll meet him up there in a little bit, that he's interested in his work, but he's not at all. There's an implication that's made inside this whole premise that I think needs to be looked at from a different angle. And the implication is that if you're a nerd, or you're somebody that's not a popular person, or somebody that's not a ladies' man, or somebody that's not, what would be considered, an alpha male or something along those lines, then you have less to offer the world, and you're more driven potentially to do something to get revenge and get even on those that don't treat you the way that you want to be treated at an earlier point in life. Now, I want to question that, because at the heart of Killian, what was at his heart? What was at his heart this desire to prove something? This goes back to the people-pleasing thing. Was this something to prove something to the world / Tony Stark, that no, I really am somebody, and I'm going to prove it to you by performing these crazy experiments that turn people into bombs, and that's how I'm going to get even with you? If that's the case, then it doesn't matter whether or not he is, nerdy and frail or whatever. It's all at the heart of the individual. I think this goes back to what we talked about last time when we were talking about what made Captain America was his heart. What made Captain Marvel was her heart, is her heart. What makes the person that they end up being, hero or villain, is not necessarily the things that happen to them, and it's what they do with the things that happen to them, and that is a heart issue. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I didn't really have any sympathy for him. I mean, it wasn't terrible what happened to him. I mean, yeah, he had to go and wait on a roof, but he wasn't, he wasn't like a good man determined to take his scientific knowledge to create something good and keep knocking on doors until he found the support to do it. He gave them one shot. He was not embarrassed in public. He was just stood on a roof on his own. That's not that terrible. Not compared to what Captain America went through. It's very difficult. I find it very difficult to have any sympathy. I just don't think. No, I think you're right. I just think his heart was from the beginning. It's almost like his appearance reflected his heart. And then when he looks like he's cleaned himself up and got healthier, you're to start with. I mean, I naively didn't see it coming. Like, I thought it was, I thought it was, well, I didn't really know. I can't remember, but you think he's nice. Anyway, he was Mike in Neighbours. So, I never expected Guy Pearce to play a baddie. So it was a bit of shock because he wasn't just a baddie. He was really bad, like really, really bad. And what he did to Pepper, and also what he did to that robot. I was very upset about that robot.
Yes.
I'm still really unhappy about the destruction of Tony's lab, which is his fault because he drew the baddie towards his own home, which was stupid. But they didn't have to get rid of all of them. And I'm still upset about it. It's just wrong.
I want everyone to know your deep sympathies and compassions for the robots that Tony has in his lab that he has since the beginning of the first film. He insults one and calls him dunce and threatens to turn him into a can opener or a.
Yes, but he loves him. It's a definite love relationship. I know he takes the mickey out of him, and I know that this robot's not brilliant at his job, but the robot means well, even though we know he's not human. Like, he's a good character, and I think that there's a very interesting thing for me going on with. So the beginning of the film, where you think all that Tony Stark is doing is having PTSD, what he's actually doing is incredible work secretly, and the robots are part of that. And the way that his mental health is actually supported by those robots, including the slightly rubbish one, that matters. So the complete destruction of all of them for me was like, you just took the emotional support that he was able to access from machines because he trained them to work with him. I don't know. I thought that was too harsh. I would, like Guardians of the Galaxy, Groot comes back as baby Groot. I really do strongly think that, they should have brought this robot back. I'm not happy about it. He was a good character.
Well, we'll see if there is another iteration of the character at another point in time.
Ooh, mysterious.
Mysterious. So we've covered the gambit today in this exploration of not one, not two, but 3 Marvel movies, all pertaining mainly to the same character. But within that dynamic of Tony Stark / Iron Man is also the characters of Pepper Potts and Colonel Rhodes, aka War Machine, and even a look at the dynamic of who the villains are and what they do to reflect back the actual aspects of the character and the heart behind the hero. And as it's often said, a hero is only as good as their villains. If the villains are not people that fascinate us in some way, shape, or form, captivate us in some way, shape, or form, or make us at least do a little bit of self-reflection and introspection, then the hero itself really has nothing to offer us in terms of our understanding of ourselves and in our interest levels of caring about what happens in that character's life whatsoever. So, Heidi, any closing remarks or thoughts about what we've discussed today?
I just can't believe how much I've got out of studying this character with you. Actually, I'm still getting more and more and more. I find it quite amazing. There's one more thing that I just like to celebrate about Iron Man as a superhero, because what fascinates me about this, talking about all of this with you, is what does make a superhero. Like, what is it? Is a running theme for us. And one of the things that surprised me about Iron Man is I thought he was a lesser superhero because he's built a suit. Like, he doesn't have physical characteristics of extra strength or something. But actually, I was so wrong, because at the end, when he brings in a whole team of Iron Men, that's what he was doing when he had PTSD. He was building a whole incredible team, and he is a genius. Like, his part of his superhero thing is his absolute incredible ability to invent. And I think we often undervalue inventors, entrepreneurs, people who are solving problems in a very niche way. And I just wanted to celebrate that about him and about all of the entrepreneurs in the Hounds of Business who are here with us today or will be watching this later, because you guys rock with your very particular niches and ways of solving problems for the world. So I wanted to celebrate that about him and about you guys.
Amen to that, my friend. So big shout out to everybody that has been here today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Want to give a big shout out to Jinlin, to Sierra Sambroski. Thank you for being here. Kevin Moreau, my homie. We've also had Jason Forehand and Sindel Dunn. And let's see, scrolling through here, Melissa Weinmiller. Thank you guys all for being here, and for everybody watching on the replay. Appreciate you very much. For Christine Lynn Jones, thank you for jumping in for the brief period of time that you're able to be a part of our show. We appreciate you very, very much. Thank you guys so much for making this show another part of your Tuesday morning. Heidi and I both appreciate you being here. Here's our information for where you can follow us, where you can find more about our work and join into the work that we do. All of my stories that I write from a personal and spiritual growth perspective to shine a light on transformation and what that looks like from both an entertainment and enlightening and inspirational and an educational way, is all at growthfarming.com. And for Heidi and all the different things that she has with her Gently Rebellious ways, including her brand new newsletter, which is fantastic. Go check it out. I put it in the link there, heidimarke.co.uk, and also follow her on LinkedIn to get connected more with her. That's going to do it for us this time around. What will be coming up in the next edition of the Hero Story Garden? I don't know, but that's okay, because that's the way the garden grows. Sometimes we just figure out what it is we're going to be focusing on in our conversation. But I promise you this, if it has not already been clear to you up until this point, it will be worth your time, be worth your energy, be worth your heart, and be worth your focus. We'll bless you in many ways. We bless you guys today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time.